your biology is not optimized to create anything meaningful in life. That's an interesting point. That you're hardwired as a person to avoid adversity, yet adversity is the very thing we need to progress.
You are either progressing or regressing. There's no stasis. There's no real stasis in the middle. The stasis ends up becoming a state of deterioration and degradation.
If the environment is too static, you have to introduce turbulence. If the environment's too turbulent, you have to introduce some stasis and some stability.
Well, adversity strikes, you got to identify it. Step 2, interpret. Step 3, respond.
Stability may present the same disadvantage that you think lies only in adversity. You have to look at both as opportunities.
So there's danger that surrounds stability. There's more to do than you can do. You got to program that balance. I think that's going to be the challenge for a lot of people.
You're listening to The Leader Factor, a podcast where we take leadership principles and distill them into actionable behaviors, shareable frameworks, and scalable initiatives. Here are your hosts, Tim and Junior.
Hey everybody, it's Junior. Hope you enjoyed today's episode. Everything we covered today is going to be put together in a nice downloadable available for you in the show notes and at leaderfactor.com. Make sure to go and download it. If you liked today's episode, don't hesitate to leave us a like. Please subscribe and share with a friend. Catch you next time. So Tim,
Yeah.
I heard there's a recession coming.
Really? You heard that?
Yeah, I hear it.
I've been hearing that for 10 years.
I know. Me too. It seems like every day of every week of every month and year, there's rumor of a recession. The reason I bring it up is because when it does happen, this next recession, that is imminent, apparently, 91% of companies will do one of two things. They will fail, or best case, they'll eke out performance equal to what they were doing before. Now, this is from some empirical evidence, which is really interesting.
And this is based on what, the last economic cycle?
No, several. 80, we'll talk about this, 90 and 2000.
Okay, so they put them all together.
Yep.
Okay.
So the only 9% of companies emerge stronger after a recession. So what does this make you think?
So 1 out of 10. 1 out of 10 emerge stronger. 9 out of 10 are eking it out or even failing.
Yep.
It reminds me of, I think, the pattern that we saw during the pandemic, Junior. If you go back to the pandemic, you have an event that kind of liquefies the status quo. And so as we looked at organizations and we were working with organizations, what were they doing? I thought a very clear pattern emerged where you had a very few that were accelerating. What was everybody else doing? Hibernating. Hibernate was like, go get in your bunker. We're going to wait this thing out. Very interesting response patterns.
Yeah, really interesting response patterns. So there's an article called Roaring Out of Recession. There's a lot of R's. HBR 2010. They, in this study, analyzed 4,700 public companies across those three recession periods I mentioned, 80, 90, and 2000. About 9% of them flourished after each downturn, outperforming industry peers by at least 10% in sales and profit growth. So that's the way that they categorized them. So we can tell that 10% that you called out responded differently to the stimulus. The stimulus was something that liquefied the status quo. We have a recession that's disadvantageous for almost everyone. It's inherently advantageous probably for some companies, depending on what they're doing and what the situation is. But for most, it's going to be a bad event.
Yeah.
And yet there were 9% that roared out of the recession and catapulted growth, experienced the same set of circumstances. And I'm sure that this happened across many of the same industries where you may have been competing in the same space. And it's not just that one industry came roaring out of the recession, but organizations across industries did that were competing for the same dollars, playing in the same market, and yet respond differently to the situation. So the title for today's episode, we've narrowed it down to 2. I guess you'll see which one.
Okay.
I guess you'll see which one it is.
Yeah.
But we had the adversity advantage or the stability stress paradox. And we've been going back and forth. How do we position this episode? And as I was thinking about this topic, originally I put the adversity advantage. And I thought, well, this is going to be great. We'll talk about these organizations. They went through hard things and they come out better. But it seemed a little trite because it's talked about so much. Hard things are good for you. Really lean in, right? It's going to purify the organization and you'll come out the other side. Yeah. But it's not enough. So I wanted to go a little bit deeper and talk about the other side. So there is this thing, which we'll discuss today, called the stability stress paradox, which is another layer. It's a level deeper that I think is going to be an interesting conversation to have. So the premise is that adversity is fertile ground for growth, yet we're hardwired to avoid adversity. When adversity comes, what are we hardwired to do? The very thing that you mentioned: hunker down, survive, hibernate. And this is biological.
Yeah.
So the cool thing here and the irony is that you're hardwired as a person to avoid adversity, yet adversity is the very thing we need to progress. The point here is that it's biological. And that's where we are going to spend a little bit of time today unpacking this, because there are things that the listener, you, I need to overcome in order to take advantage of the adversity. And we need to pair that with some stability. So what do you think about this topic generally as we jump into it today?
I think one of the most important things, Junior, is that if you think back, if you think about the organizational response to when adversity strikes, the organizational response is a function of the executive team's response, really, because they have enterprise level responsibility to figure out how do we direct this organization? Where do we go? And so as a team, they are responsible to do three things. And we all have to do this at an individual level and an organizational level. Adversity strikes, you got to identify it. Sometimes, if it's a big thing, right? If a hurricane rips through your neighborhood, you don't need anyone to help you identify that. But that's always step one: identify. Step two, interpret. Step three, respond. And so somewhere along the line, if you look, right, the 90% versus the 10%, they're doing this differently. The 10% are looking at the adversity and they're saying at some level, this is fertile ground for growth. And the others are not. So identify, interpret, respond. That's not happening in the same way.
Yeah.
And again, I just want to say the organizational response is really the collective response of the executive team. And let's say that's 10 people.
Yeah.
They have to come together. They have to interpret and respond. And that's what's happening.
Yeah. So in this slide, we say the difference is how each group responds to instinct. I love framing it this way because every person in that scenario has the same instinct. And instinct I'm speaking about biologically. Mm-hmm. We're hardwired to avoid adversity to keep us alive. Yet each of us, presumably listening to a podcast like this, is interested in building something meaningful. An interesting organization that has impact in the world, a meaningful, high-performing team. Your biology is not optimized to create anything meaningful in life. That's an interesting point. Your biology is not optimized for you to go and create a competitive organization. Your biology is hardwired you to keep you alive, to avoid the very adversity and pain that's associated with doing anything meaningful. So we have to overcome our biology that's been wired for a couple 100,000 years. We have to overcome that to do anything meaningful, not just professionally, but certainly professionally. And to me, that's an interesting point because like right now, what's your biological instinct? Is it to be doing a podcast and doing content creation? Was it to hop on a plane yesterday and fly to Canada and be with clients? No. Your hardwiring incentivizes you to stay home and hibernate, avoid the pain, right?
Push the easy button.
Right. But I can't overstate that point. I don't know why I found this so fascinating, but you are not wired to create anything meaningful, biologically speaking. Now, I believe that there's other wiring that helps you aspire for more, and that's another conversation. But you have to overcome a lot of friction in order to do something meaningful. And that's why we have this difference between the 91 and the 9%. The 9% experience that impulse to hunker down, to preserve self, and they're able to quiet that and say, actually, we're going to go do this over here because there's an opportunity. They think and act their way through it, and they're able to create something meaningful.
Well, I think we need to think about constraints though too, Junior, because constraints generate, well, they may not generate, but they give us the opportunity to innovate. Innovation comes out of an environment that is constrained, right? Where we have scarce resources. So something's going on differently with the 10% here, because we all experience oftentimes acute constraints, and yet amazing, beautiful, creative things come out of those constraints. So something's happening in the interpretation and the motivation to respond to those conditions.
Yeah. What do you think the difference is between resilience at an individual level and at a team level? You mentioned the executive team, how they respond to adversity, and that trickles through the organization. Is there a difference between personal resilience and organizational or team resilience?
It's a great question. I don't know for sure, but I have been trying to synthesize the resilience research literature when it comes to the individual. And if you do that, what you find is that there are 4 basic response patterns when adversity strikes. So the first response pattern is that you bounce back quickly, and that's fantastic. So you're able to respond well, and you come back to baseline functioning. The second response pattern is that you bounce back slowly. That means you're going to gradually recover, but you're going to be able to get back to baseline functioning. The third response pattern that you see in the research literature is that you bounce back never. That means that you've developed chronic symptoms and it becomes pathological and you're just not able to get back to baseline functioning. But here's the fourth one, and this is so fascinating. You bounce forward. This is what we're talking about. So in clinical psychology and in positive psychology, this takes us to the pattern of post-traumatic growth. So is there an organizational equivalent of post-traumatic growth where you bounce forward? Not only do you recover baseline functioning, but you go beyond it. And that's what you're talking about with these 10%, Junior. Do I think there's an organizational equivalent? I do. I think it's the team is somehow able to mount this response pattern that is post-traumatic growth.
Well, that's where the conversation starts to get interesting in my mind, because you can go tell an individual to be resilient. And in the slide, we've got that. The capacity to withstand or recover quickly from difficulties. The ability of a substance or object to spring back into shape, elasticity. But how does that translate into a team? That's a different question.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily true that a group of resilient individuals equals a resilient team.
Oh, you can say that again. You need to say that again, just so people can hear that.
Well, and the opposite is also true. But if you have a group of highly resilient individuals who exhibit the bounce forward response to adversity, it's not necessarily true that if you put them in a group that they will be a resilient group. Why? True. Because you've introduced interaction. You've introduced culture. We say that culture is the way we interact. If you're an individual, you're interacting with no one in a vacuum, right? Just resilient individual. You have some individual adversity. Surely you're interacting more broadly speaking, but we're not talking about that. If it's a team, now there's a whole bunch of other stuff going on. You have people wired to act out of self-preservation, and you're acting them to be resilient as a group and bounce forward not only for the benefit of the individual, presumably, but for the group.
Yeah.
That's not obvious.
Yeah.
It's not obvious that all of a sudden we experience some adversity as a group and we as a group lean into it.
So each member of that team loses control and gains interdependency.
Yeah.
And we have to do this together now. I can't go do it by myself.
Yep. Well, and we're hardwired not only to survive, but to belong. And what's fascinating about that is that if the environment imposes something really difficult on the organization, that wiring to belong doesn't go away. Yet, what has to happen in order for the organization to adapt is that it needs to do something differently, which is counter the belongingness need if we're talking about ideation and execution and innovation that's counter the status quo. Now, that might seem like a lot. There's a lot going on there, and there is. But the principle is that the environment will impose a scenario that requires deviation from the status quo. Deviation from the status quo is not something that we like to do as humans because we're trying to survive and we're trying to belong. Yet that's what a resilient team would need in order to come out as one of the 9%. So there's something going on in the environment that will allow or disallow that outcome. And that's the conversation today, which is the stability stress paradox, which we'll introduce. Do you think that 9% is about right? With the teams that you've worked with over time, do you think that about that percentage is accurate, that get through the hard thing and come out better on the other side?
I actually do. That squares with my experience with teams, right? Which is in most organizations, the basic unit of performance. But I think that statistic is about right on.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because I think, probably 10%.
1 out of 10.
It seems about right. But most people at this part of the conversation would say, okay, now we need to go be resilient and develop a resilient team. But this is where we tend to oversimplify. And I think that this is where the grind culture goes a little bit too far to one extreme.
Okay.
And says just double down and just work through it and you'll get out to the other side. But survival doesn't mean improvement. And
no,
so
it doesn't.
You may very well make it through the recession or the adversity or whatever thing came your way, but are you actually going to be able to get better? It's a different question. So the stability stress paradox, well, let's open it up. This paradox ends a lot of companies and it ends a lot of marriages. Humans need stability. That's what we've been talking about so far.
Yeah.
We crave security and predictability. We love familiarity. We love routine. But at the same time, we need novelty and we need variety. The same is true with organizations. We need challenges.
This is getting complicated, Junior.
Maybe, but at least it's interesting.
Yeah.
We need challenges. We need fresh experience. And so if you were to say to an organization, you're just going to be stable. Well, the organization, if it wanted to be great, isn't going to want that. It's going to stagnate, right?
So the reality is that there's no such thing as equilibrium.
Well, if there were, it wouldn't be good for you. And
but even so, you are either progressing or regressing. There's no stasis. There's no real stasis in the middle. The stasis ends up becoming a state of deterioration and degradation.
But that's not always immediately obvious from the outside looking in. If you took the most stable organizations we know of, governments are one. What happens in stasis? Outwardly, it may be okay. Inside, they're rotting.
Yes.
And that's true.
But that's what I'm saying.
Yeah. But you won't see that immediately.
It's a deception to say that you can run your life or you can run an organization in a healthy state of equilibrium. I don't believe that. You're either you're progressing or regressing.
And you're progressing or regressing in both times of famine and times of plenty.
That's right. It doesn't matter what the conditions are.
If it's stable or if it's adverse, you have an opportunity to do both of those things. So that's the too much stability and we stagnate. Now, on the other end, too much turbulence and it's chaos. And that's where grind culture becomes extreme. Not that we don't need a little dose of that here and there, but if we go too far that way, you wrote in the notes, tyranny at the extremes.
Both extremes.
That's certainly true.
There's tyranny at both extremes.
So the sweet spot, moderate stress, is where innovation and resilience tend to flourish.
Yeah.
And often people will lean really into what's impossibly difficult to build the resilience. But if we don't have moderation in the adversity, then we're not going to make the progress that we're going to need to make. So
here's another way to frame it. So if you think about tyranny at the extreme, at one extreme is boredom. Okay, but is boredom a state of equilibrium? No. Boredom is a state of deterioration. It may be gradual, it may be slow, you may not be able to see it with the naked eye, but boredom is a state of deterioration. The opposite extreme is burnout. Now that's a state of deterioration too, but you can see it, right? It's more visible, it's more blatant.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, you can see the tyranny at both extremes.
Yep. So as I said, that problem ends a lot of companies, it ends a lot of marriages, because this is also where great relationships live, moderate stress.
Mm-hmm.
Name a great relationship that you have with anyone that has no stress. There's not going to be one.
Yeah. Well,
also,
it's going to be... It's going to be an acquaintance. It's going to be right,
but it's not good, right?
Yeah,
for the sake of the question,
it's not a meaningful relationship.
Yeah,
really, could be someone in your Rolodex.
Yeah, sure. But on the other side, if it's too stress filled, it's certainly not going to be excellent relationship.
Right.
So, what's the balance? How do we find this balance? This is where the paradox comes into play, and this is where it starts to get interesting for leaders who are trying to get better. Some of the stability and some of the stress will be naturally occurring in the environment.
In other words, it chooses you.
It chooses you. You don't know the timing, and you don't know the severity, and you don't know the duration.
That's right.
It could happen at any time. You could flow into a season of plenty, and things are great. Maybe that lasts for 6 months. Maybe that lasts for 6 years. It could be turbulent. Maybe that lasts for 6 weeks or 6 months. You don't know. There are macroeconomic factors. There are geopolitical factors. There are talent factors, things that happen at the individual level with people on your team. You don't know.
Yeah.
And so what has to happen is that if you are getting too much of either one of those, you have to modulate as a leader. And this is where the skill comes in. If the environment is too static, you have to introduce turbulence.
Mm-hmm.
If the environment's too turbulent, you have to introduce some stasis and some stability. Every organization's going to go through at least one existential crisis. If they can manage their way through that, then one of those three things is going to be true. They either underperform, they get back to where they were, or they do better.
Yeah.
But the same is also true for stability. So we talk about adversity as if that's the thing you have to get through, yet it's also true for stability. That's an interesting point that we don't often talk about. Stability may present the same disadvantage that you think lies only in adversity. You have to look at both as opportunities.
So there's danger that surrounds stability.
Both as a person and a professional.
I agree.
In a business, in a relationship. You have to have the radar and the alarms set for either one. Because if it's too stable, that's a bad thing. What do you think?
Well, I just think the temptation is always during flush times to slip into complacency. And therein lies the danger.
Yeah. Well,
but are the alarm bells going off? Are they alerting us to the fact that there is risk associated with these conditions, especially when they don't come immediately, right? There's suspense between cause and effect, and that's a false positive, and it pulls a lot of us in, and then we go down.
Yep. So as a leader, we're going to talk about what this means for you. But we talk about manufacturing some stability in the adversity so that your team has something to hold on to. But you also have to manufacture stress. And that's something that you have to learn over time.
People don't like that.
No, they don't. But it's something you have to learn how to do as a leader.
You do.
Because if all is well and good, all is not well and good.
That's right.
And you have to make sure to introduce some volatility in the environment. So how do you do this as a leader? The first thing that we'll talk about is screening for resilience. It is infinitely easier to develop resilience in a team that is already resilient at the individual level than it is to try and develop fragile individuals into resilient people.
I can't agree with this more. And we have learned through trial and error, haven't we, Junior?
Yeah, we totally have.
And so that's the question. How do you find hungry, scrappy, gritty people?
Yeah. And some, we won't always have the luxury of starting at zero and building a team with an eye toward this. And so we'll talk about that. But if you have the opportunity, at least start today by screening for resilience really hard. There are 3 things that I like to look for when I'm looking for resilience, because it's really difficult to evaluate that on its own, right? Just, are you a resilient person? Yeah. These 3 characteristics, I think, are some markers for resilience. One is resourcefulness. What do you do with what you have? Can you do a lot with a little? People who can do a lot with a little tend to be resilient.
No question.
2, gratitude. Know who you are relative to everyone and everything else. If you see yourself as dependent and you have a healthy acknowledgement of your own dependence, you're grateful for what's around you, you're grateful for the help of others, you're grateful for when things go well, that is a marker for resilience. And the last one that I would mention is compassion. If you understand that other people are people, those people tend to be more resilient because they have an eye toward others and the way that their interaction affects everyone else in the whole scenario. What do you think about those?
I think it's right on. I think those are accurate markers: resourcefulness, gratitude, compassion. I think what underlies all of that too is just high drive. You've got to find someone that has their own generator, that you don't have to babysit at task level accountability. And I think you look for evidence that they have done that in their lives. And an evidence of that is when they are able to share with you challenges that they have chosen in their lives, right? What have they chosen to do?
Yep.
When adversity didn't choose them, but they chose it. They chose some stress. They chose some goals. They chose some challenges. They chose some peaks to climb on their own. I think that's evidence.
Yeah.
I think you got to find that.
Oh, you totally do. I had the opportunity to teach a youth group here locally, and we were talking about this topic of resilience. And an exercise I had them do was to look back at the last 5 hard things that happened to them and mark the pattern. I didn't use the language that you used, but it would have been useful. Did you bounce back quickly, bounce back slowly, bounce back never, or bounce forward?
Right.
For each of the 5, right? What's your pattern? That is hugely helpful.
It is.
Because if you're honest with yourself and you're looking back at the big 5 things and you're like, well, still haven't recovered from that one. And like, definitely was worse. And that one took me out for 6 months.
Yep.
You can see where the opportunity lies. And you can do some of that in some behavioral interviewing. And
you can.
It's important to do that.
You can.
And if you're screening references, it's a great question to ask. If you want to like niche down on the resilience piece, it's really important.
It is. Plus, Junior, I think that the resilience is a proxy indicator of the person's ability and willingness, both ability and willingness to learn and grow in the future. And that's exactly what you're going to need.
Yep. It's funny because I've been doing some interviewing lightly over the last few weeks for a couple positions, and I've seen the differences here. And what used to not be an immediate no from me is now an immediate no when I see somebody that is exhibiting some of these behaviors on the wrong side of the ledger. If I see that they are not here to learn, like it's almost an automatic no.
Yeah.
Oh, like you're here to just tell me stuff?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, got it. Right? Not going to work.
And the way that we like to frame that, Junior, at Leader Factor is we like to say that you are demonstrating the habits, the learning disposition, the mindset of an unsupervised learner.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yep.
Are you an unsupervised learner?
Yep. I'm going to hopefully get this right. It's a Carl Jung quote. He said, every year before you're 40 is just research. I love that. And it makes me think about, who knows if there's anything magical. Who knows if there's anything magical about 40, but I've thought a lot about that. And like, what if you lived every day of your life as if you were an apprentice, right?
Yeah.
That mindset is a healthy mindset. Imagine seeing someone and man, they would stand out like a sore thumb in the best way possible. You're interviewing somebody who's 50, who's like, I'm here to learn, right? And like, obviously I contribute, I can do these things.
We
but
don't
like,
even expect that.
No, but shouldn't we?
Yes, we should.
Right? Especially with how volatile the environment is.
Yeah.
Right? If you look at all of the technology available to you, all of the tools, how is anyone going to be productive if they're not learning constantly? So we can move on from that, but I think it's an important point.
It is.
Okay, move from theory to practice. This is step 2. So step 1 was screen for it. That's the easiest thing that you have available to you. Just get a team that already has a lot of those core components. But from there, there's still work to do. And this is where we go from being a group of just resilient individuals to a resilient group. One is strategic distress. This is the first thing that we're going to talk about. Strategic distress means imposing the stress when there isn't any and modulating the stress down when it might be too much. And this is where you have to become really skilled as a leader and monitor that at all times, not only at the level of the group, but at the level of the individual. If an individual is going through something super high stress, personally or professionally, you need to be tuned into that. And maybe there's something that you can do to moderate that. If somebody's been just kind of floating for a little while, not good. You got to go over there and introduce some stress, introduce a deadline, introduce something, right? On a new assignment, a cross-functional project. Like you got to go disrupt it and say, hey, stasis, not good. We've got to go do some stuff.
We're going to disrupt your equilibrium.
That's right.
Yeah.
What do you do here? How would you approach this idea of strategic distress with the team?
With the team?
Yeah.
Junior, honestly, it hasn't been much of a problem because we just have project after project.
There's enough environmental stress.
We have a vision and we look out on the horizon and we look at some of the things that we want to accomplish and there are milestones along the way.
Yeah.
And so we kind of reverse engineer from there and we say, we got to do this and this and this. So I think for us, we never run out.
Yeah.
I think it's more about, I think our challenge is the opposite, which is how do we regulate the stress so that it's not too much?
Yep.
And how do we make the trade-offs? It comes back to the trade-offs and the triage and allocating the scarce resources that we have. I think that's where I find myself more often.
Yeah.
And personally, that's the same thing.
Yep. And what's interesting to me as a leader, you will always have an excuse to run around with your hair on fire. Always. There's always something to be up in arms about. There's always something to be neurotic about. But what your team needs often is for you to come into a volatile environment and say, it's okay.
Yeah.
You're all right. This is going to be fine.
Mm-hmm.
And you're not going to do that in ignorance, but you can be completely apprised of everything that's going on for the worse and still impose some stability by just showing up with some calm, right? So Strategic distress, I often think about like heart rate zones for endurance training. I'm an amateur endurance athlete. There are people out there significantly better than I am, but it's interesting to dabble in. And what I've learned is that you have to manage your stress very carefully when it comes to your training impulse. You can't just go and do as much volume as humanly possible and expect the best results.
Right.
In endurance sports, in any sport that's aerobically oriented, you are managing your heart rate zones. There are 5, right? And you'll often see them in a pyramid. Mm-hmm. The base of that pyramid, your cardio base, is going to be zones 0 through 2, right? That's going to be where a lot of that just grindy work is done over periods of years where you're building your aerobic base. From there, you have to go and spend some time in each of those zones at disproportionate levels. You're not going to spend 50% of your time training in zone 5. Your body's going to just get smashed, right? It won't put up with it.
You can't do it.
And if you don't have enough stimulus because you're staying too low, if your heart rate stays at 125 forever, you're never going to improve. So you have to strategically go to each of those zones and spend some time there. That to me has been so informative as a person, as a professional, after having trained for long enough. Because now I have a more nuanced understanding of not just like more is better, right? No, more is not always better. Sometimes more is better. And when it is, go do it. And when it's hard, go do it. But you have to be careful. If you only spend, 5% of your time in zone 2 and you're doing threshold and speed work too often, it goes anaerobic too fast, like you're not going to get the full benefit of the training. That's a metaphor for life to me. And so you've got to be really careful. And as a coach, right, that's what your coach would be doing as an endurance sport coach. They're helping you program for each of those zones to spend an appropriate amount of time. Is that not the same thing that you should be doing as a leader?
I think so.
Hey, like you over there, too much zone 2.
Yeah.
You over there, too much zone 5, right? You need a week of recovery because you have stress fractures, right?
Yeah.
Like we need
and
to get
you
off.
need to get going.
Exactly. Like I'm going to go crack the whip over here.
Yeah.
And I'm going to give you some money to go do dinner. Right?
So in other words, you're doing programming.
You are. And that's kind of a cool thing. It's an interesting way to look at it. So heart rate zones and professional development. Who'd have thought? Anything else you want to talk about here in strategic distress?
I think that with most organizations, you're probably going to find yourself in the position that we find ourselves, and that is, how do you? There's more to do than you can do, and so you gotta program that balance.
Yeah,
I think that's going to be the challenge for a lot of people.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on to the next one. Adopt a pirate crew mindset. So
did you say pirate?
I said pirate. Yep. Murder and plunder. That's what we're going to advocate for. Just kidding. The pirate crew mindset, I like the visual because it helps me understand like what do I think about when I think about a pirate crew? I think about some swarthy guys that are on a boat that have a mission. And I think the metaphor informs some of what we need to do as leaders. So I broke down pirate crew into a few different things.
This is going to be interesting.
Yeah, where is he going to go? Storms are par for the course. That's one thing that I think about when I think about
really like that.
A pirate crew.
Yeah.
Like if you let's say you're a pirate, right? Let's say. When you get on that boat, do you think that you're going to be calm seas?
Yeah, smooth water.
No. Like you know what you're getting yourself into.
Right.
And so when a storm comes, it's like, well, it's another one of those, right? Having that mentality of like, I'm getting on the boat, I know what this is going to be like, I think is really helpful because when it does come, you're not going to be surprised. It's just part of it.
You prepare for their arrival. You just don't know when, but that's part of the journey. It's part of the adventure.
Yeah. The next one is that we've been here before together. Now, I'm imposing some of my own thinking on what I think this pirate crew does and how they think about life. But I think that there's some element of unity, right? Now, there's certainly mutiny that we hear about on the pirate front. But like, think about we're after the same goal. We each have different jobs, and we have to get through the storm and do the thing to get the bounty, right? What do you think about that? We've been here before together.
Well, I think that speaks to the cohesion of the team, the alignment of the team, and there's some track record there.
Yeah.
They've learned to trust each other.
Yep.
They know what to do. There's a division of labor as well, so it's mutually reinforcing. So I like that. Can you bring in a new crew member and integrate them quickly? I think you need to be able to.
Yeah.
It can't take forever.
No, but yet there's still some deference to those who have been around.
I agree.
And like you've got to earn your stripes. But like there's an element of that I really like.
But you got to let people come in and contribute as quickly as they are able.
Right, but like competence, that's the thing.
Yeah.
They're going to ask, right? Can you really hoist the sail? Right? Can you really like man the ship?
Yeah.
And if you can't, like you're not welcome here. Right?
Yeah.
That's why I like that pirate crew mentality here is like you show up and you can contribute or we don't want you here.
Everybody starts by scrubbing the deck.
Right.
That's fine, but let's move on.
Yeah. Yeah. If you can contribute at a higher level, that'd be great because that's best for all of us.
Yeah.
But I think that there is something to that. Hey, we've been here before together. There's some camaraderie. I can lean on you. I know you're going to do your job. I know that you're going to do your job. And I don't have to be worrying about it because we're each going to do our part and we'll be able to weather whatever's coming.
I think the other thing that comes to mind, Junior, with the pirate metaphor is that you're allowing maybe a little bit more autonomy in the way that people do the job. That's what strikes me.
Yeah, there's no rule book.
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
there's no code of conduct.
There's more autonomy to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's part of some of these others. So the next one, I have each crew member has a stake in the outcome.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I don't know if this is true. It seems true, right? I've seen Pirates of the Caribbean, whatever. Everybody feels the risk. Everybody feels the reward, right? We're experiencing the downside risk together. If we don't accomplish the thing, we all don't accomplish the thing. But if we do, like we're going to pass around the goal together, right? Next one, rough and tumble democracy.
Oh.
This one I kind of like. You throw the rule book, right, out because there isn't one, right? There's probably not a list of rules that we're all adhering to in terms of policies and procedures. There's some unspoken stuff and there's some expectations, but we throw the book out the window. We embrace a little chaos. We take some risks and we move forward. So it's a little bit more gritty than the traditional, like, here is our onboarding manual, right? Like pirates don't have onboarding manuals, right?
You know what? I really like that. The pirate onboarding manual.
Yeah. But like,
you
wouldn't that
open
be the
it
coolest
up and there's
one?
nothing there.
Yeah, but it's like, yeah. Or there's some things there that shouldn't be.
Yeah.
The next one I put is nothing is sacred. So if something needs to be thrown overboard because a storm's coming, you throw it over.
Yeah.
We're here to accomplish the mission at any cost, and we're going to do what we need to do that. If something needs to go, it needs to go.
I think it's good to push on this one, Junior, because we've worked with so many organizations that have been so successful over a period of time that they become extremely risk averse. And it's all about de-risking the organization, and they don't know how to play offense anymore.
Yep.
They don't know how to play offense. And so the game is we're trying to avoid losing.
Yeah.
But we're really not playing offense. And it's risk aversion, but it's also, there's some complacency there. And it gets very dangerous.
Yeah.
And so I really like this one because there's path dependency based on the choices that we've made and the strategy that we have and the trade-offs. But you can get yourself in a pretty tough spot as an organization if you keep doing that over time. Yeah. You have to know and learn how to disrupt yourself. Yeah. and you have to learn how to change before you have to. And that's not easy.
And playing not to lose is so boring.
It is pretty boring.
It's so boring.
Yeah.
Often you're defending a status quo that somebody else made. And it could be the somebody else that made it could be you from 5 years ago.
Oh, exactly.
Right?
It typically
maybe
is.
you did the thing, but what you're just going to sit here at your castle and defend it.
You're going to
forever.
defend what you created.
Yeah.
It's all defense.
Boring. So boring.
But hard to do.
Yeah, but like go dare for something more, right?
You need a new counteroffensive.
Which is this next one, which is a swashbuckling ethos, right? I'm going to put this in our offer letters now.
That's going to be good.
Bold moves, a bit of daring, and a strong sense of camaraderie under pressure. And I'm interested to hear what you think about this one. Like a little bit of flair for arrogance, right? There's no pirate, like no good pirate is just completely humble, right? I don't know of any good humble pirates.
No, they're confident.
Yeah, Blackbeard is confident.
Confident.
Yeah, and again, this is not an endorsement for piracy, folks, but just like hang with the metaphor. But I think that there is something to that. Like we take pride in what we do, right? There's some forward leaning, there's some offense, there's some drive, there's some ambition.
Yeah.
And a lot of that I like is unapologetic. Like, no, this is what we're after. This is what we're going for. If your team is sitting playing defense, everything is just on paper, it's by the book, there's no daring, it's safe, it's stasis. Like, what a waste. What a total waste of your energy. Like, go do something, right? So that's why I put this one in here.
I'm going to mix metaphors, Junior, for just a minute.
Yeah.
So we got to bring football into it. Okay.
Yeah.
And piracy and football. I know. Yeah. I'm mixing metaphors.
No, I'm for it.
You have to be able to call audibles. You read and then you react.
Yeah.
And sometimes that blows up your playbook.
Yeah.
Because what's happening becomes so emergent. You're not being reckless. You're adapting to the environment. You're looking for opportunities and you're acting. You have to be able to do that.
Yep.
Especially in a highly dynamic environment.
No, I love that. Because let's say that you're playing offense in football and suddenly they move from zone to man, right? And the quarterback's got to make the read and make a decision. Maybe calls an audible at the line. It's like, hey, I've got isolation over here.
That's right.
I'm going to go hit my guy this way.
Yeah.
I love that. And if you're a pirate, maybe there's a kraken that you have to deal with, right?
That's right.
Okay, we'll move on from the pirate. The next one, narrow, don't broaden. We'll move through these last three relatively quickly, but this is a failure pattern that I see in a lot of organizations, and it's where I've failed personally before at a level of a team. If you broaden the scope of what you're going after in a time of trouble, you're almost always going to lose. If you look at the 9% that came through the recession stronger than they were before, the dominant pattern is reduction.
In their strategy.
They went back to basics in their strategy, in their personnel, in their product mix, right? Jobs comes back to Apple and is like, no, like stop, like this, right? We're going to do X, Y, Z. That's all. That focus is difficult because organizations by themselves proliferate.
They do.
The stress is an opportunity to reduce. And we should always take advantage of that, even if we don't have to. If the environment is volatile, that means that the team's in a fluid state. It's a great opportunity to be like, actually, no, like prune the tree. We're going to cut off this branch. We're going to do this thing. So narrow, don't broaden.
If you don't narrow, Junior, then what are you doing by definition? There's going to be dilution because you still have scarce resources.
And what does this do when the stress comes? It dilutes every individual.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about how do you create a resilient group, it's more difficult to create a resilient group if they're responsible for doing more things. If they can hunker down and make sure that their one thing is taken care of and in good hands, great. They're going to be less stressed. We have a greater chance of coming out the other side.
Junior, I have a friend that ran a business for many years, and part of his tagline was unlimited services. Okay, so I want you to think about that from a strategic standpoint. After a few years, he found an area and he absolutely focused. So he did this in an incredible way. He narrowed, and he has become so successful because of that. And that's a principle of strategy, right?
Yeah.
You have to narrow, you have to focus, you need disproportionate amount of attention, energy, and resource in a specific area, and then you go.
Yep. Especially in times of stress. The next one is have discussions with no egos and no apologies. Now, this is pretty polar, but I think that there are times for this, especially in times of stress. We're going to give each other some grace, and we're going to leave our egos at the door, and we're not going to apologize for our point of view. We're going to say, this is what I think. Hopefully your ego's at the door. Hopefully mine's at the door, and we can have a real honest, frank conversation. We can move forward.
Yeah.
Right. Like the pirates don't say like, hey, so last week I was kind of thinking, right? And I know that I'm not sure exactly quite how you're going to take this, but right. That's not the conversation.
Yeah. I think you have the wrong island in mind.
Yeah.
You need to go to this island.
Right.
Yeah.
And so we have to be able to do that and do that quickly. There are times where that is useful, and a resilient team is going to demonstrate this pattern. They're not going to walk around and tiptoe all the time, and they're not going to be nice all the time for the sake of being nice. They're going to say what needs to be said. They're going to do so with respect, but we're going to give each other some grace, knowing that we're going after the same thing, and it's not a personal thing. And we've talked about this, and there are other strategies that we can employ, but put bluntly, no egos, no apologies.
And when we come to a decision and it doesn't go your way, then we do commit and disagree.
That's right. And the last one, I threw this in here because I wanted to.
Okay.
Maintain a healthy cash position. I think that too many organizations don't do this, and I think it creates for teams that aren't resilient. There's a broader macro level.
We could talk about this for a long time,
financial
especially
component.
with the way that startups are capitalized, and then the discipline that they exercise in the use of that cash. Right.
So right now we operate out of Lehi, Utah, one of the startup centers
of the world. Silicon Slopes.
Silicon Slopes.
That's where we are.
And we have an interesting view into a lot of organizations that are here. A lot of opportunity to meet with founders, to meet with different people in growth stage startups, in things that have scaled quite big. We have some big organizations here too. And I can't emphasize enough the amount of stress that the financial position imposes, regardless of whatever else is going on. If you have some stressful environment that comes from luck or timing, bad luck or bad timing, and you have a really disadvantageous financial position, you are not going to have as resilient a team as you would if you had taken care of your balance sheet.
Well, you're not going to be able to weather a storm.
Yeah. So I just wanted to call that out because it often goes unsaid. Like, I don't know why we don't talk about this more, probably because not many people have influence over that situation. But if you do, right, if there are listeners out there, I feel like it's worth saying, right? Mm-hmm. Like you have to have an eye toward this. You can't expect your team to be infinitely resilient if you don't have your financial affairs in order and your balance sheet looks terrible.
Yeah. So, think about all the unicorns, Junior, that became unicorns. And then a day later, a week later, a month later, they're imploding.
Yeah.
Right. Yep. And their cash position is terrible. There's no liquidity and they're going down.
And you're optimized to work on the quarter.
That's right.
And you're going to make some decisions in crisis for your investors that may not be in the best interest long-term of your company.
That's right.
Or your people.
That's right.
So, okay. Those are the cultural conditions that we have to manage if we're going to build a resilient team. Strategic distress, adopt a pirate crew mindset, narrow, don't broaden, no egos, no apologies, and maintain a healthy cash position. Tim, what do you want to say as we wrap up today?
I just want to come back to the central paradox: stability and stress. If there's too much stability, introduce stress. If there's too much stress, introduce stability. I think that's always going to be true. I think that's the theme, and I love it.
Yep. It's the mark of a great leader. So if you want to become a great leader, that's something that you're going to have to learn how to do. And we're here to help you do that. So if you like today's episode, please leave us a like, share with a friend, and subscribe if you haven't already. I'm sure the downloadables that are going to be coming out for these episodes are going to be excellent. So go ahead and download those. You can have an offline resource that you can use, print out, put on your desk. And another thing that I wanted to just ask from the listeners is there an episode topic or a question that you would like us to cover on the Leader Factor? I would love to start sourcing some of our material and topics from all of you. So if there is something that's top of mind, something that you wish we would cover, throw it in the comments and we will be sure to read them. And maybe you will find your topic or question in an upcoming episode. With that, we will say thank you and see you next time. Bye-bye.